Hi guys, so welcome to another battle report. 1,000 points of Dark Elves against 1,000 points of Lizards. The army lists are there for you if you want to pause. As with previous battle reports, this was against one of my students, so there will be one or two bits of feedback in this for him as we go along. So, starting on my opponent's side in deployment, you can see in the far left he's got the Dark Shards there with the level 2 Sorceress. Then next to those a unit of Harpies, then a Bolt Thrower. He's got his Cold Ones in the middle of his line there. Then the Corsairs with a Master, and then a Bolt Thrower in the right corner closest to us. On my side, closest to us a unit of Skinks, and then two units of Skinks, both with a Priest in immediately after that. The General is the one in the unit next to the building. Both Ripidactyl units there behind the General, looking to get behind that wall with the Vanguard, and the Salamander Hunting Pack just out of view on the other side of the building. Then to top it all off, you've got the BSB just behind the Ripidactyl Riders. So this is Vanguards. Obviously the two Ripidactyl units deployed quite deliberately close to that wall. I'm concerned about the amount of shooting that my Toughness 3 troops are going to have to deal with. The BSB staying behind the building. Obviously the Strength 6 single shot from the Bolt Thrower, a real danger to him, so just staying out of harm's way for now. So as it would turn out, I would go first, and I wouldn't be able to use the cover of that wall. Obviously, wall being an obstacle gives my opponent minus modifiers when shooting at me. So my Ripidactyls are going down the side there, using the building as cover, and the unit that's out in the open I'm going to try and boost with Wisons. I'm thinking to go after those Cold One Riders, obviously plenty of killing blow. And then perhaps take out a Bolt Thrower or the Harpies with another unit. Thinking send the Salamanders after the Dark Shards and then move the Skinks up and sort of pick off whatever's left with some poison shots. I should probably mention at this point that both the Cold One Riders and the Corsairs have a Blot Toad on them, so my Ripidactyls get an extra D3 rerollable attacks against those units. So, at the end of my turn, I've not done any shooting because everything is out of range, but I was very concerned about those Ripidactyls out in the open there. A lot of Dark Elf shooting for them to take, and they're only Toughness 3, so I was very concerned to get Wisons on them. I actually put my Power Stone into this so that I could cast Wisons on 5 dice. My opponent decided to dispel this with his 2 dice. And would actually need a double 6. Now, Ryan, I think that was a bit of a mistake because you had your Dispel Scroll, and this was a great opportunity to inflict a lot of damage on that unit at close range. And that's what I'd have probably done if I were you. I'd have dispelled Wisons and then hammered those Ripidactyls while they're out in the open without any shooting modifiers. So this is the end of my opponent's movement phase. You can see the Cold One Riders in the middle are getting ready to deal with the Ripidactyls should they charge that Dark Shard unit. The Corsairs have just sort of turned and are heading towards the middle of the battlefield. But I'm actually really pleased with Ryan's use of his Harpies because he knows that he can't march block with them. And charge block with them because I can fly over him. So what he's actually done is he's positioned them really well to threaten both bunker units that hold my Skink Priests. Just a nice sort of charge distance in the arc, in the charge arc, in a position that's fairly difficult for me to deal with. So at the end of my opponent's turn, you can see the Ripidactyls in the middle, despite having the protection of Wisons, have still taken quite a beating. The Dark Shards took one out, and a Bolt Thrower took out another Ripidactyl as well. The unit of Skinks closest to us suffered the wrath of the Bolt Thrower on the right there. Obviously it couldn't see very clearly through the hard cover of of Ryan's troops. Ryan did cast Soul Stealer, but I managed to dispel that. But he did get Power of Darkness on those Dark Shards. This caused me a lot of concern this turn, because he's really hammered one of my two big important units here, and this caused me to make a bit of a silly decision, as you'll see on the next picture. So here in my following turn, I've become quite concerned with the damage those Dark Shards can do, and I've decided to engage them in combat with my bigger remaining Ripidactyl unit. That was really stupid. As you'll see, don't know what I was thinking there. The other unit's gone after the Bolt Thrower, and the Skinks have gone into the river in the middle there, because Skinks are aquatic, so when your opponent is shooting at you with that one remaining Bolt Thrower, then I get cover there. The BSB has moved over behind the wall. Not really sure what to do with him at the moment, so I just sort of got him under cover, and I'm approaching those harpies and trying to sort of shoot a few down with my skink skirmishers. So you can see the Ripidactyls didn't do very well. Obviously Dark Elves always strikes first, higher initiative than Skinks, so they were re-rolling their attacks. They were already hitting me on 3s because their weapon skill's superior to my own. And then, of course, Dark Elves also have the martial prowess rule, so they get to re-roll failed wounds in the first turn of combat. So that's 14 re-rollable 3s on hits and re-rollable 4s in combat, because, of course, although I've got the Whiten's Wild Form on the Ripidactyls, he's got Power of Darkness. To make things worse, the Ripidactyls didn't even score a hit back, broke from combat, fled 9 inches, and my opponent chased them down 10. So that was the end of my Ripidactyls. A little more successful elsewhere. The Salamanders did manage to take out 3 of the Knights, and the Skink Skirmishers did quite a good job with the Harpies. Unfortunately, the 2 Ripidactyls on the Bolt Thrower didn't manage to make it break. They beat it, but it passed its leadership test. I did get Weiston's Wild Form, but it was a miscast, and I got a power feedback, so both of my wizards took a wound, and I lost 4 of my remaining 5 dice. So I'm in a bit of a bad way at this point in the game, facing the prospect of dealing with a Dark Elf army using nothing but 36 Skink Skirmishers and a hunting pack with a few low-level wizards and a skink character. Not ideal circumstances for any Lizardman player, but there you go. So into my opponent's movement phase, you could see the Cold One Riders have flank charged what remains of the Ripidactyls, and that will finish them off. The Corsairs have charged the unit of Skink Skirmishers that's now fleeing, and that's landed them in the middle of the river, which will really slow them down. The Harpies have charged at the unit of Skink Skirmishers next to the Salamanders. There were only 2 Harpies at this point, so I decided to stand and shoot, and managed to kill both before they got into combat, so that was good. My opponent has decided to stand still with those Dark Shards. Obviously, long distance or movement, either way, takes the penalty, but I think I'd have probably moved up to make future shooting easier if I had been him. So at the end of my opponent's turn, you can see the Ripidactyls have been finished off by those Cold One Riders. Notably, Ryan rolled a 7 on his magic here, a 5 and a 2, and decided to cast Soul Stealer on my hunting pack. Now, Ryan, that was the right spell to cast, because the hunting pack is the only really potent threat I've got left on the board at this point. But you put 4 dice into it when I could dispel with 5, and I did dispel it with 5, and that kept me in the game. You had a chance there to go for the win. So next time, you've got a big spell like that, hit it with 5 dice if you can. Elsewhere, the bolt thrower missed with a single shot on the skink chief with the wall providing cover, and one dark shard wound suffered by the salamanders. So into my next turn, you can see close to us the skinks are advancing on the bolt thrower. Obviously the strength 6 shot with the bolt thrower presents a danger to my skink chief, and despite the fact that the bolt thrower is toughness 7, of course you use the machine's toughness, not the crew's, I'm still wounding on 6s with poison shots on my skinks, so I'm sending the skinks after that couple of poison shots. That'll do that one. And then I've charged the other bolt thrower with the skink chief just to take it out. In the middle of the battlefield, the skink unit with the priest has rallied. Things are not so bad here. You know, those corsairs, they're not marching through that river, so a nice slow target there. And the dark shards are quite a way away from me, so although I'm only working with skinks and salamanders, I'm able to break up my attack and do it piece by piece. So you can see at the end of my turn, the skinks closest to us have been successful with that bolt thrower, and in the middle the skinks and in particular the salamanders did a really good job on the corsairs. Further in the distance, the skink chief has shamefully failed to break the bolt thrower crew. I did try and cast Wisens, but my opponent used his Dispel Scroll on that one. So that was pretty much the end of that turn. So my opponent's movement phase, the Corsairs, have still got that master in them, and obviously, you know, the skinks and even the salamanders are not really going to be a match for all those re-rollable attacks. And the Corsairs have charged at the salamander hunting pack, obviously fled, and then they redirected successfully, again fled, and so they're still caught in that river. The Cold One Riders have turned to threaten that skink chief if he fails to take out the crew of the bolt thrower for a second turn. Now I think a photo was missed in this turn, but not a lot happened. Soul Stealer was cast and scattered. The shards took out one wound on the salamander, but more embarrassingly the skink chief failed to cause a single wound and took one himself against that bolt thrower crew. So subsequent movement phase, the salamanders and the skinks both rallied, cold-blooded obviously, and the unit of skinks has moved towards those Cold One Knights, just hoping I can, you know, maybe just get off a lucky pop shot on one of them. And that was it for the movement phase. So not a lot happening in this phase. A couple of Corsairs went down to some skink shots. Wisens was failed to cast twice, once with 4 dice, once with 3 dice. But most embarrassingly, the skink chief has again failed to deal with that one Dark Elf crewman, and has basically written his own death warrant because now those Cold One Riders are bearing down on him. Now, this is the end of my opponent's movement phase, and you can see the Cold One Riders have obviously charged the skink chief. My opponent has realised that his dark shards are too far away to be effective and is now starting to move forwards with them. But it's interesting, in the middle of the battlefield he didn't charge with the Corsairs, thinking to sort of advance on me and get me later, but I think this was a bit of a mistake because it meant that I didn't flee with either of my units, and so I was able to shoot in my next turn with both of my units. And I think if I'd have had the Corsairs, I'd have probably charged, because you've still got that master in there, and still 5 or 6 Dark Elves is more than enough to take out 10 or 12 skinks. So you can see at the end of the turn, the skink chief was beaten. I did issue a challenge because, you know, obviously that means I'm receiving less attacks, but the champion did him anyway. The dark shards took out a wound on the skink crew of the salamanders. Magic was ineffective, only 3 dice, and didn't cause any wounds. And of course those cold ones are able to reform because they've beaten combat and wiped out their enemy, so they're now facing the skinks. So the end of my movement phase, you can see the two skink units closest to us have gone either side of those corsairs, both out of the charge arc, and obviously I don't want my opponent to be able to chase them both down later on in the game, so I'm splitting them up now. In the back of the board, the skinks there, they are all 12 inches away from that bolt thrower, so I'm thinking I want to take that thing out. That thing kept my poor skink chief occupied for far too long and deserves to die, and it's going to. And the salamanders are obviously in a good position with those dark shards. 2 ranks makes an ideal target for the teardrop flame template there. So that's going to be pretty ugly for the Dark Elves. Now, this is the end of the turn, and I think there's a real message in here for anyone that's a beginner player, that being that, you know, a couple of turns ago it was looking really bad for me. All my big, hard hitters, bar the salamanders, were dead, and the entirety of my opponent's army was still alive and kicking, and yet, you know, I've slowly pulled this back. So don't be disheartened when, you know, things don't go your way at the start of the game. It isn't over, although it's easy to think that it may well be. Now in this turn there's been a miscast on Wysons, but rolled a 7 detonation, so all models in base contact, which is none, took a hit. The skinks did finish off that bolt thrower, and 2 more corsairs were killed. The salamanders killed 11 dark shards, so that was brutal up in the back left corner there. So my opponents charged the skinks, and I've decided to stand and shoot against those cold ones, hoping, you know, maybe I can just take one out with the charge reaction, and if I get lucky, one in combat. Corsairs have done a free reform in the river because, of course, they've got a musician, so they've passed a leadership test with that musician, and then they can reform for free and move but not march, and they've chosen to go after the skinks closest to us, and that was the end of the movement phase. So, end of my opponent's turn, you can see the 2 cold ones demolish the skinks. Not sure whether I should have fled. Obviously, on a cold-blooded 5, it's about the same as a 2 dice 7 you're on, almost a 50-50 about whether you rally, so I decided not to, but that's the way that one went. My opponent got a magical feedback with the spell against the salamanders and gained a wound, but also lost a wound. And the dark shards, remarkably, all missed their targets, so that was good for the salamanders. So my final turn of movement, the skinks have been able to march past the corsairs. Obviously, if an enemy unit is within 8 inches of you, you have to take a leadership test to be able to march, but I passed that, so I'm able to move out of their charge range, so I know I'm not going to take any wounds with that unit before the end of the game. At the back of the board, the salamanders and the skinks are double teaming that sorceress and the 2 remaining dark shards, trying to get some victory points there. The Cold One Riders are now so far out and facing the wrong direction that they're not going to do anything for the rest of the game. And that's something for, you know, newer players to think about. You know, your big heavy units can get pulled out of position and become useless. And you do have to sort of ensure against that, because now I just don't need to worry about them. They can't do anything. So, end of my turn. You can see the salamanders and the skinks have been successful, and I've managed to get the points for both the shards and the enemy wizard. The corsairs, 1 survived, plus the master, so not the full points for that unit, just because 1 lived, which is quite frustrating. And that was the end of my turn. So there you can see my opponent has reformed, but obviously he's only got combat troops left, and he doesn't have the time to charge into combat, so that was the end of the game. I scored 640 points, my opponent 540, so small difference. I think I got an extra 50 for killing the general minus the underdog, but basically the game ended a draw. So a couple of things to learn from this one, I think. The first is, you know, don't charge Dark Elf units with low toughness troops when they've
got lots of attacks on you, because it will hurt. But more importantly, on a serious note, you know, it can look like a game is over when it's not. So don't be too disheartened and play it through. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.